With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
How do you top your love for your cat? With a cascade of decadent savory gravy over a mouth-watering mousse pâté. Fancy Feast gems. 2 gourmet pâtés in one convenient pack. Simply peel and plate to reveal a pyramid shape that makes eating delightful and pamper her with an experience as extraordinary as she is. Turn the everyday into the extraordinary with Fancy Feast gems.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. Great family novels define the epochs of literary history, and so often the very best of those novels are focused on oddball siblings who mesmerize those around them for better or worse. These eccentric families wind their way through Austen and the Brontes, Tolstoy, Tanizaki, Franzen, just to name a notable few. Perhaps in the end it is because we all see our own families as impossible and strange to the outside world that we find so much room in our imaginations for the great novels of domestic drama. Jonas Hassen Khemiri has written a truly great family novel, The Sisters, and this epic work of fiction, running over 600 pages, is his very first novel written in English. The story of the Mikola sisters, Ina, Evelyn, and Anastasia, comes to us as a global story of self-discovery, where 3 sisters of Tunisian-Swedish heritage grow up in Stockholm, always on the periphery of that culture, and find themselves remade in metropolitan spaces of the global north and south, losing loves and each other at various moments in their explorations. We live always on the outside of the sisters' lives with a third-person narrative trading off sisters to understand them across the decades. But most importantly, we live with the interspersed first-person accounts of Jonas, a Tunisian Swede of similar age, who is swept up into the sisters' chaotic wake. Through Jonas's eyes, we'll understand their worst traits and impulses as an impossibly attractive magnet into a mirror world to Jonas's own dysfunctional transnational family. Crafted in exquisitely textured scenes from the dance floors in a Stockholm's club to see a seedy apartment building in Tunis to the dense flood of New York City's Brownian motion, The Sisters makes us both family member and obsessive neighbor of the sisters by turns. It is impossible to look away from the sisters' lives as we watch them pull apart and then reconstitute as an amoebic being that may indeed have room always for one more. The prose is lively and often running at full speed across the page, and in that way it is seamless with its focal characters. The Sisters is one of my favorite novels of the last few years, and I cannot wait for you to live in its world. Jonas Hassen Khemiri is the author of 6 novels, 7 plays, and a collection of short stories and essays. His work has been translated into more than 35 languages. The Family Clause was a finalist for the National Book Award for Translated Literature An Invasion won an Obie Award for Best Script. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and numerous other publications. He lives in Brooklyn with his family and teaches creative writing at New York University. Welcome to Burned by Books, Jonas.
Very happy to be here.
The Sisters is simply a masterwork of fiction. It is epic in time and scope and character. When did the germ of the novel first come into an existence? And what is the history of the novel's coming into being as the book that I hold before me now?
I think it started with an ambition to kind of create something on a bigger scale that I'd ever done before. I mean, this book is kind of, you mentioned the length, and thank you for that beautiful introduction. It just warms my heart to hear that you have enjoyed spending time with these sisters, because I did too. When I was writing it, I felt like I was hanging out with them, and that they, on some level, almost like saved my life. I really needed them when I was writing about them. And I think that, that it makes me really happy to hear that you had a similar experience reading their story.
I absolutely did.
And then, the question of genesis, where something starts. I mean, it's always tricky to know, but I remember thinking about size and the size of my canvas, my literary canvas, and I was reading, not to compare myself with Tolstoy, of course, but I was reading War and Peace, and I had never read it before. And I realized that he managed to create a reading experience that was different than anything I'd experienced before, because his canvas was so huge, but the chapters were fairly short. So it was quite hard to stop reading, even when I was bored. Of course, when you read Anna Karenina, he's, objectively kind of a better, whatever better means, and when you're trying to become a better writer. But like he's in better control of his own tools, I would say. When War and Peace, one of the things that I loved about that book, and it's one of my favorite novels, is the fact that you can see him kind of getting lost on the page and then finding his way. And, Tolstoy has made all of this research that he kind of crams into the book, and then he over-explains it towards the end. But then there are these like beautiful scenes, and the brevity of the chapters makes it's quite tricky to stop reading. So that was one impulse where I kind of went like, I wonder if I could just be inspired by / copy Tolstoy's form. Like what happens if I expand my canvas, and I wanted to write something about where I follow my three main characters over the course of like 35 years, but then kept the chapters fairly short. What would that look like? So that was one kind of question that I had at the beginning.
And it does drive you forward to those shorter chapters. I started noticing them about a quarter of the way through, and I was like, "Oh, this is a form." And I love the way you describe it as a very broad, large tapestry, but with these nicely packaged, speedy chapters.
Yes, and speed is such an important concept in this book, because the other thing that I was aiming to do that made me curious was that when I started writing it, I passed 40, I was 42, 43 when I started writing it. And I had this feeling that time was continuously accelerating. I kind of sat and thought about the summer that had just passed. And I realized that it felt like that summer had taken place, that it had taken, like, in my experience, it had just swooshed by in kind of a couple of days. Actually, it's been like 10 or 12 weeks. Then I started thinking about the summers of my childhood and kind of how time felt like it passed a lot slower back then. So another starting point of the novel was just, I kept thinking, like, I wonder if I can write a novel where I try to capture what time feels like, especially this acceleration of time. So I had this idea of writing something larger. And then I had the idea that I wanted to try to capture time speeding up. So the structure of the book is actually we follow these three sisters as they desperately try to escape a curse. That's one of the main themes of the book, and try to find their home. But we follow them. The first book takes place over the course of 1 year, then 6 months, then 3 months, then 1 month, then 1 week, 1 day, and 1 minute. So I just tried to see what happens if I created a structure that did that. And I think that is also part of why this book seems to be, that why readers seem to be responding well to this book. I think that there's an emotional truth in that structure that I think mimics some of the struggles that the characters go through. And that has always been my one of the many reasons why I love writing novels is that you can, sometimes we think that we have to use existing structures when we create novels. And I think it's the opposite. We need to kind of sit down and think about like structure as rather than something that we create in order to make the reader feel a certain thing. I think structure for me has always been something that I build in order to keep myself interested in the project. And once I started doing that, I just kept finding new ways and new structures and my work as a novelist became so much more fun when I started doing that. So you can see that from my first novel to this one, you see this. I'm basically trying to use this classical form, tell fairly old stories about families and curses, and then see what happens when I collide them with more emotional and contemporary forms, I would say.
I want to stay with form and style to talk a little bit about your sentence work, which is, you talked about speed and time and how experiences of time change as we age. And I felt like you wanted to do that for the reader so that we would have experiences of speed in the sentence level, because you have these wonderful, sometimes page and a half long sentences that represent formally exactly an experience of sometimes anxiety, sometimes a sense of like something like unspooling in front of you that you don't want unspooled. And I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about kind of speed on the sentence level.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that once you start thinking about time as a limitation and time as something time as a concept that is continuously running out, that we have to care for, you start asking yourself, what am I actually doing with my time? What am I focusing on? And I think you can see that on the sentence level because many of these characters have a hard time ending their sentences. Let's put it that way. They continue to seem to think that everything is connected, So this is the opposite of kind of like a minimalist take where you, they in their minds, everything, I think they have a hard time saying goodbye. They have a hard time dealing with death. They have a hard time ending their sentences. So, and it creates this. I was in conversation with the lovely Tascanti at the New Republic Library, and she said that for her, when she read it, it almost felt like a confession, but a confession made by what did she say? Like a rapper, something like that. We ended up talking about "Oh, dirty bastard," like in a confession, And I like that because you're completely right that the sentences feel like there's an unwillingness to end, and I think that is also, it's linked to the bigger theme of the book. Like, what do we actually, if we start thinking about what we're supposed to dedicate our time to, one of the bigger questions that the book asks is kind of, should we focus our time on building our relationships, or should we focus our time on building physical objects or books or art? Or because the sisters, they grew up with this, they grew up with two kind of competing stories. They grew up with one story that their mother keeps telling them that actually someone has put a curse on them and they have to flee this curse. The curse basically says, everything you love, you will lose. And ultimately, that is the curse of time, right? We're all facing some version of that curse. Yeah. But the sisters, they are convinced that this curse is, I call it like semi-true. These stories that we believe about ourselves, but we don't really believe in them. But once we're in a certain mood, or we have a bad day, or we haven't drunk our coffee, all of a sudden the stories become true. Is that kind of narrative. I don't think they actually believe it, but once they start losing people, friends, lovers, husbands, they always have that narrative in the background thinking, what if this story is actually true? So that's one of the kind of themes that's kind of one version of their lives that they are they are trying to escape from, you could say. And the other narrative is actually kind of the opposite, is that their dad has convinced them that actually they're not cursed at all. They're related to one of the men who built this famous high-rise in New York, the Rockefeller Center. At some point, he's shown them, this famous photo, lunch atop a skyscraper with these steel workers who, I mean, everyone has seen this photo,
maybe the most iconic of early New York.
Exactly. You see Central Park in the background. They are kind of, one of them is like reading. One of them has hopefully water in a bottle. It kind of looks like something in there, but like, so we've all seen this photo, and their dad basically says, actually, don't believe in that curse. You're related to constructors of high rises. You're related to people who have built something who is maybe not eternal, but it's definitely stable and around. So these two, they grew up with these competing stories. And one of the questions that the sisters ask themselves, and also that I've kept asking myself when I was writing this book, is kind of how do we balance our time? Like, should we focus more on building, metaphorical buildings, books, or should we take care of our relationships? And I mean, of course, it's not an either or question, but that balance is important to get right.
Yeah.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contrast. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Healthcare professionals can lead their careers with LinkedIn. Discover jobs by specialty, preferred shifts, and even desired salary. From mental health therapists to radiology technicians, it's now faster and easier for healthcare professionals to find the right fit. Learn more at linkedin.com/healthcare. Side effects may include faster job placement, improved work-life balance, and increased career satisfaction.
Got some good news for your ears. More of that good stuff is coming up. And even better news for your hair. The best hair care is at Sephora. They've got all kinds of products for every kind of hair. From brands like Amika, Kerastase, Day, and K18. You knew where to get great audio. Now, you know where to get great hair care too. Sephora, good news for great hair. Shop hair care now at Sephora.com.
The another sort of formal version of this kind of ceaseless thinking and wanting the sentence never to end is the marvelous use of parentheses in one specific moment. It's Jonas. And there's a way in which the parenthetical also works really powerfully here. Even when you're not using parentheses, so much, especially of Jonas's kind of narrative, is, well, then I remember this about this sister. And then I remember this. And then, this particular event swings me over there. Almost like everything has a little parentheses attached to it. And I wonder if that one moment in which we end with like 13 parentheses at the end of the sentence, whether that had a wider range than just that one formal moment for you.
I've always loved book series, and I've wondered why. That I get an immense pleasure of like buying all Rachel Cusk books and then just putting them side by side and just creating a little family of Rachel Cusk. And I have my Knausgård shelf. I have my Edouard Louis shelf. It's like I just enjoy creating a pattern out of, creating patterns, I guess, creating, in a way, families. And I wonder sometimes if I do something similar in my writing, where you kind of go, well, I'm not sure all of these things or thoughts or elements or friends are actually related, but what if I put them side by side and see what happens? What if, I remember that particular, what was it, 13 parentheses? Like at that moment.
I think it is, yeah.
One of the things that Jonas is trying to make sense of there is actually related to Rockefeller Center and kind of the class perspective of the book. He's trying to make sense of his own relationship to being middle class, but romanticizing the working class. So he has two parents who come from different backgrounds. His father was born in Tunisia in a poor, he comes from a poor background, and his mother is from a more stable Swedish middle class background. And his father has this idea, just like my father had this idea that he at some point will be able to unlock and defeat injustice if he gets rich enough. So money is the key to unlocking kind of future happiness, future liberty, basically becoming himself through wealth. And then he has a bunch of different projects. Today, I guess you would call them side hustles in order to become rich, basically. And none of these, he never succeeds. And my father had a similar thing. He had so many ideas, so many dreams that he never resulted in, anything really. But he was an amazing dreamer. He had so much energy when he dreamt. Not as good at, he was an amazing dreamer. Then carrying through those dreams were kind of harder for him. But I wonder if times like that discussion about like being middle class, but then romanticizing the working class at the same time to trying to create the narrative early on in life. I think that is something that the Jonas character in the book does a lot of, and I have done that too. So I think that the link between the parentheses and the book series is basically that I've enjoyed and I keep enjoying creating patterns and putting things, just taking different ingredients and just putting them side by side just to see what happens. A lot of my creative work is, sometimes it feels like I'm in a research lab where I kind of take different elements and I put them side by side, almost like a chemist does. I think I've never been in an actual lab, but I guess that's what they do. I remember George Jonas talking at some point about characters, how we get to know them, that we have to put them under pressure. And that's what chemists do. You put like your elements under pressure. And I do something similar in my work. In this particular book, one of the things that I kept doing was just alternating between telling the fictional story about these sisters, and then just every other chapter is autobiographical, or you could say just started out with me writing down a personal memory. So I wasn't sure why I needed that form, but I recognized that when I did that, something happened. There was an energy in the book. So we have fiction, nonfiction, fiction, nonfiction. And then the more we read, we realize that the boundary between these two ingredients are kind of, I would say, blurred. So the sisters pop up in Jonas's world, the other way around.
Yeah, I wanted very much to talk about this friction between them. I wouldn't have called it until you said that autobiographical, because I didn't know. We're led to, because of the name and aspects about age and being a Tunisian Swede, to think that there's some kind of connection between you and the Jonas of the chapters, but there's certainly the friction between what feels explicitly fictional in that third person limited or third person, maybe even we want to call it a free and direct narrative, and then that first person. But I wonder if you talk about how you decided to have this auto-fictional or whatever you want to call it, autobiographical element come in, because it's such it's an important thing to the fiction, but clearly it embodies a lot of non-fictional elements too.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it done in this way before, so I wanted to try it. And I noticed that there was a lot of energy between the fictional sections and the so-called non-fictional chapters. So that was it's much less about theory and much less about brain and much more about heart when I write. And I just trusted that I sensed that there was energy there. And then I tried to keep doing it. And then I kept doing it for 600-700 pages. And it created something that kept me intrigued. I also noticed that the Jonas in the book he's trying to get to know these sisters because he doesn't know who he is. So in a way, he's understanding himself through them. And in reality, that is what I did as a writer. I had a bunch of personal memories that I had never been able to write down in Swedish, and I couldn't make sense of them. I couldn't transform them into novels or into stories, because they just felt too lifelike and too small in a way. But once I put these memories next to the stories of the sisters, all of a sudden they started to make sense. And maybe that is why I write, that maybe that is a way for me to create meaning in my life, to have a sense of purpose, to create a bigger story out of all these, the randomness of life that is, at least for me as a person who didn't grow up with any faith, transforming all of my life into, or maybe like looking at my life through the lens of a novel has always brought me immense joy. And I mean, before I was a writer, I did that as a reader. I looked at my life through the lens of the worlds of, writers like Astrid Lindgren or Susan. I remember reading Outsiders as a kid. I was just like that. Speaking of sibling rivalry, did you read that one? Like the classic, I guess it's a young adult novel.
Yeah. No, I remember reading it in middle school and being totally entranced.
That broke my heart. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember thinking also like, it's the first person. I mean, I haven't read it in many, many years now, but at least in the version that I read, a Swedish translation, her name was, I think it was just S.E. Hinton.
Yes, S.E. Hinton. Yeah, that's right.
S.E. Hinton. And the it's written in first person, and the narrator is a boy. And I remember looking at the author photo, realizing that she was a girl. And it was like almost, hallucinating effect where I realized that this is space where you can make shit up.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowed to play here. Because the world of these three brothers who are the main characters of Outsiders, that world felt so real to me that I couldn't imagine the world was made up. And then she reminded me that actually that was the case. And so the meaning making tendency has been there since I was a kid, getting that through reading. And now, for the last 21 years, I've done that as a writer as well. But it's a similar process. It's an attempt at making sense of my experiences. And one of the joys of writing this particular novel was that these sisters have been looking for home all their lives. I mean, they've been looking for a feeling since they were young that they rarely experience, the feeling of home, the feeling of connection.
Is it Inna who describes it as security? Like she's having that conversation with her mom at the dinner out with Hector, and she said, that's what you didn't give us. You didn't give us security. And it's, for me, I think one of the things that Jonas is so attracted to about the sisters is that he sees in them that lack of a solid ground underneath them in a way that he often experiences.
Yeah. I mean, the question of security is so interesting because what does it actually mean to give your kids security? I mean, I think about that because we moved to the US 4 years ago. Our kids were 5 and 8 at the time. They didn't speak
Sweden before that?
We were in Stockholm, Sweden. Yeah. So we moved to New York because I got a fellowship at the New York Public Library in order to finish this book, actually. So we moved and I had this, I had a lot of thoughts about security. What does it mean to give my kids stability? Because, I have this memory of waving goodbye to them the first day in school and, just a beautiful public school in Brooklyn. But from a Swedish perspective, that school looked like a prison. Security guards. I was about to say electric fences, but there were no electric fences, but it felt like the fences were electric. It didn't look like a school in Sweden, and they had to put on face masks on. And imagine going to work tomorrow and you don't speak the language. That's a tricky work day. We kind of, we just sent them off into that place and we could, and then you could say, well, that's not stability. That's not security. But in essence, if you think about it, 2 weeks later, they had friends. 2 months later, they came home and kind of, they started dreaming in English and started communicating in English, and kind of their English was, flawless. Isn't that also security, that you can give your children a sense of whatever happens, you got this?
Yeah.
And I think that is something that, we can, it would be easy to say that the mom in the novel, just like my dad in the novel, and a lot of the characters in books, she has her maybe she's not the most stable person, but one of the things she gives her daughters is this feeling of whatever happens, you will have each other and you will always be there for each other. And these three sisters, they go, well, I mean, you summarized it beautifully in your introduction that, they there's a lot of love between them. There's also a lot of frustration and betrayal and complication between them. But ultimately, what we learn over these years as we follow their stories, that they will never let go of each other. Whatever happens, they will be there.
One of the things I loved about first meeting the sisters is we kind of meet them 2 or 3 times in different moments. We have the beginning where we're meeting them at this club, and they're going to, Ina knows, just in her gut that they're going to in some way abandon her, during which is sort of her worst fear. And then she has this kind of meetup with a guy who will become her husband, and we meet the sisters there. They're described by maybe their kind of principal, at least from the outside, personality quirk or detail. Everyone wants to talk to Evelyn, and she's just this sort of the narrative core of the sisters, and she can keep spinning stories. And Anastasia is just, so interesting and vibrant. And, but then we meet them again through Jonas's eyes and Jonas's, friends, and they're seen as eccentric oddballs. They're seen as, total outsiders. They can't be Swedish. They've got to be something else. And they'll be, reflected upon by neighbors as just sort of let to, go to seed outside. There are no limits and controls. And I liked the way that the story wants to keep reintroducing them, because they're not fixed. They're not just those characteristics. They develop and change and evolve into things that are very different. I wonder if you could talk about how they evolve and what this kind of process of reintroducing them is in the novel.
Hearing you say that, I had the mental image of multiple parentheses again.
Mm-hmm.
Ina is the control freak, but she's the older sister, but she's also longing to be loved. And maybe part of this, what is going on in the novel, is that they are continuously trying to be more than just one thing.
I like that.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that there's an enormous pressure. I mean, I don't even want to say the word social media, but like there's enormous pressure on us to kind of be one thing, to define us through one image, in one quote, in one bio, whatever that is. But like and I think I was guilty of that early on when I started writing this book too. I wanted the sisters to be one thing. Actually, I wanted during an early meeting with my editor, I remember saying to him that I, kind of binge watched a bunch of Marvel movies with my kids. And I said, I think this is, it's time for me to write my superhero novel. I want these sisters to have superhero powers. And he was, he's an amazing reader, and he is kind but honest. And he was like, yeah, if that's what you need to do, you do your thing. But I think what I was trying to say, or what I was trying to do early on, was to control them and to give them 1 or 2 superhero powers. And I remember early on in the book, when I realized that this book would be actually become a novel, was when I had the feeling that the sisters almost sat me down and said, like, we need you to allow us to be human in this book. We're not going to have superpowers. No one is going to like be able to fly or levitate or walk through walls. We need to have the right to exist in this book, but also you need to allow us to be human with all our flaws, with all our mess up, with all our complications. And as soon as I allowed them to do that, I think it unlocked something in me, because it made it possible for me to do something similar, to kind of allow me to show some of those traits that I have been hiding for many years. And part of the elements that were, for me as a writer, kind of like, I felt shameful to write about, were these episodes of like challenges with depression, or in the book, the Jonas character battles something called the hyena, which is kind of like his inner voice that is trying to destroy him, that he has to challenge in order to survive. So ultimately, we could say that this book is about at first glance, it looks like these sisters are fighting a curse that is invented by their mother. But there's also a curse in the book that is, real in the sense that I grew up with a feeling of having been cursed by my father and by something he said after my parents got divorced. And I think that is also the reason why why they are trying to escape their curse. That these curses are very different, and both of these curses are in the book. But ultimately, there are more links between the lives of the sisters and my life than I understood when I started writing it.
Mhm.
And part of the healing work for me was to kind of allow the sisters to be human, and and then I had to do the same thing when I wrote about myself, I guess, or Jonas in a book. Let's make a clear distinction between the two.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
Hey, it's Paris. I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Well, one of the, speaking of curses, there's many intertexts going on here, and one of them that I felt not as an explicit intertext, but one that shared enough commonality that felt like it was affecting my reading anyway, and that's the narrative voice in The Virgin Suicides, the Jeffrey Eugenides novel.
Yes, I love that. Yeah.
Because we have, in that case, a cursed family, an eccentric family of sisters that are impossibly interesting to the point of obsession, to a chorus, a kind of Greek chorus of neighborhood boys. And even though Jonas is a real fully formed, textured character, and they are not in the novel, I felt that narrative perspective and an obsession over the idea of a family that seemed to be operating with a real curse in a world where lots of people feel like they're cursed in less formal ways. And so, is that a book that's important to you at all? And when you're thinking about the curse, do we all imagine ourselves cursed in some way, whether it's something a parent says to us that sort of sits like albatross on our shoulder, or whether it's something more explicit, like, a grandparent saying you're cursed?
I think we all have thoughts that we're trying to avoid thinking. And I think we all, as a collective, lose a lot of energy once we try to suppress those thoughts. So that storyline, we don't know each other. We just met for this chat. But if we knew each other, and if we spent a couple of hours together, I think we would get a sense of what we're trying to not think. Do you know what I mean? Like we all have like an interior hidden monologue that we're trying to avoid. And I think that there's a lot of potential energy. We can find a lot of energy if we try to investigate what we're trying to avoid thinking. At least that has been kind of my experience, both in writing this book, but also living my life. What I realized, to move from theory into more kind of a practical thing, was that I realized after my parents got divorced that my father said a couple of things. Basically, before he left my mom wanted the divorce, and then he turned to my mom and kind of said, you will never be able to raise these 3 sons on your own. they will end up like homeless and, drug addicts. I mean, he was hurt and I don't think he knew what he was saying. He just said things. But I remember that moment of like, he left and we lost contact and for a couple of years. But I remember inviting that voice into my head and thinking, whatever happens, I know that will never be true. So it was almost like as when he physically disappeared out of my life, I invited the voice to have some kind of relationship to him into my head. And this sounds potentially a bit weird to walk around with the voices of the people you've lost. But I think we do some version of that. Whenever I've lost someone, I've heard their voice very clearly in my head. And whenever I lost a person to, death or to just due to life, so to speak, I've had a tendency, at least in my creative practice, to try to recreating using my sentences to try to heal the loss by writing about them. And you can see that that's like a red thread through all of my writing. Kind of, is it possible to replace someone or something that we have lost with the use of like writing or words, basically? In my mind, one part of the what I found fascinating when writing this book was I tried a bunch of strategies where I tried to reduce the energy that I put on not thinking certain thoughts. So I developed kind of I was influenced by a technique called ACT, like ACT.
Oh, yeah.
I just realized that I was doing that. So instead of, I developed some strategies where I would invite the forbidden thoughts rather than pushing them down into the subconscious, so to speak. And I found that to be incredibly effective. I just found that to be, and maybe especially if you're a big reader, you spend a lot of time with sentences. And if you do that, I think you might be, maybe these strategies might be even more effective. Basically what Jonas does in the book, he kind of uses the stuffies of his kids and tries to give the hyena voice to the stuffies and tries to invite the voices rather than push them down. And writing this book was an act of doing something similar. A lot of the things that I told myself that I wasn't allowed to think, I was able to write about in this book.
So without calling it a global novel in the sense of that term from the early 21st century, which had some pretty exacting characteristics, there's a real intangible globality to the sisters, with movement from Stockholm to New York City and Paris and Tunis, Tunisia, that begins to operate as a way of revealing character in the sisters and Jonas. Anastasia must go to Tunisia to understand herself as queer and linked to a place that was only really something of her imagination, in the way that, we have the appearance of Edward Said in the novel, who talks about, Palestine as a nation of the imagination. And Evelyn will disappear into New York City, which provokes Jonas's own awakening. And Stockholm is the home that is always almost but never quite home in the minds of the characters. How did you imagine these very different cities and countries opening up character for us?
That's beautiful. Almost but never quite. I think these sisters have spent their whole lives feeling almost but never quite. Be it on a dance floor in Stockholm, be it, and when they're taking a language course in Tunisia, be it, walking down Madison Avenue in Manhattan. Oh, almost, but not quite. So what does that mean? Like when do we feel at home? When do we feel like we can exist without that doubt? I think these three sisters, they have like different strategies to create that feeling of connection, and we see them desperately trying over the course of the book, I think that Ina uses structure to create the feeling of potential home or temporary home, structure, graphs, Excel sheets, whatever she can to kind of systems, and I've done that I've done that too. I mean, writing is a form of creating that stability, I think. Evelyn, the middle sister, I think she creates a feeling of connection through, she has a chameleon-like aspect to her. She keeps shape shifting. She is always, she can be anyone in a way. She can change her voice. She can tell a new story, tell a new story to kind of fit in a way. And I've done that too. I've used that strategy to feel connected, to feel at home. And Anastasia, she has this thing that I also did when I was in my 20s and maybe early 30s, where I had this feeling that when I didn't feel at home enough, I would need to add something in order to feel at home. So I would add music, I would add drugs, I would add, she needs to sprinkle life with add-ons in order to feel at home. And so we see this is just desperately trying to create a feeling of connection during this book. But like the only thing that actually works seems to be the connection that they have with themselves and with their siblings. And ultimately, that's kind of one of the bigger emotional changes in the novel, is that, when we meet them, they have a sense of like, they are in Stockholm, but they have a sense of like, we're here, but our actual home is somewhere else. And Ina tries to find it in love. Anastasia trying to find it in Tunisia. Evelyn tries to find it in shape-shifting, maybe. But they also have this dream place. They project a lot of dreams onto New York, thinking that once they reach New York, they will finally feel at home. And if this were a novel, they would come to New York and they will feel great. It's almost a novel. They come to New York and there's a clash between dream and reality, right? So kind of Ina hates it here. Anastasia is like, I can't wait to go home. And Evelyn, strange enough, is the one who feels like there's something about this energy in the city that makes me want to stay forever. And in that sense, I think that there's definitely an Evelyn living inside of me, because that's every time when I feel some of that energy. Even when I came to New York for the first time when I was 18 years old, I had that feeling like I'm not sure this is the safest place or the best place or the most logical place to be in. There's something about the energy in this air, the energy here that I'm addicted to.
Well, Jonas has that great line where he says that he was told that you always remember your first kiss, is it your first girlfriend, and then the first time that you fly over New York City.
Yeah.
And I never flew to New York City, but I definitely remember as a kid the first time I went to the city and just being sort of bowled over by its energy.
Yeah.
And I find that whenever I visit, it's never a place that I can imagine living, but it is a place that's impossible to forget because of that energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jonas, before I let you go, I'd love to know a little bit about what you've been reading and loving recently, and if you have any recommendations for us.
Yes. I'm currently reading this book that you might have heard of called the Bible. It is
I have heard of it.
If you've heard of it, has great Goodreads reviews. No, but like I've read the Bible. I'm reading the Bible just based on I'm writing something new, and I realized that I have never read it, and I've never read it in the way I'm following like a reading time where I read it chronologically. So that's kind of fun. It's just a different way of experiencing it. So I'm reading the Bible, but that doesn't feel fun to. I'm thinking of some of the books that were important when I was writing The Sisters, and one of them that I think it's interesting as a creative person to look back on what did I read when I was writing something, and then you can almost get clues to, why a certain project, appeared. So I remember reading a bunch of biographies about writers who were not writing in their mother tongue. And one of my favorites, I read about Conrad and Beckett and Agatha Christoph, but the book that I would love to recommend is Brian Boyd's biography on Nabokov called The American Years. I just love that biography. It's a beautiful biography. He also wrote The Russian Years, but The American Years it was a kind of a companion even before I moved here, but I love that biography. If we are talking about, we talked about writers who kind of opened my eyes as a young person, and one of my favorite writers is called Selma Lagerlöf. She was the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. She's an incredible storyteller, one of my favorite books of hers is called The Treasure in English.
Okay.
Här anas penningar in Swedish, if there are any Swedes listening. It is a remarkable novel with a subtle feminist theme, dark and gothic.
When was it written, Jonas?
I can't tell you the exact year.
No, you don't have to. Just give me a general decade.
Maybe 90, let me check. She got the prize in, I think, 1913. Let's see. I actually read it. Sometimes I teach it as well. It was written in 1904.
1904, okay.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Only 54% of Google users like this book. They're wrong.
They're wrong.
I can tell you they're wrong. It's a remark. I mean, it's just waiting to be kind of turned into a bloody murder mystery on Netflix. It is one of the reasons why I love it is because she's doing something really from just a creative, practical. It's just like from a craft perspective, it's interesting to see her. She's writing a saga, but she's using some interiority, which is, quite rare to do at that time. She almost has like stream of consciousness sections in the book. And it deals with a treasure that is being, a family is brutally murdered and a treasure is being stolen. And then someone a young girl decides to get revenge. It's a beautiful, short, intense novel. I can definitely recommend that. So Brian Boyd, The American Years, Sama Lagerlöf, The Treasure. I could also say like the book that I have bought and given to people the last year or so has been.
I always love that.
I mean, I'm waiting for Amazon to ask me if I'm crazy because I keep buying this book and giving it to friends. But I love a book by Dantiel M. Munitz called Milk, Blood, Heat, contemporary.
Yeah, I've heard of this a lot, and people really love it.
Yeah, it's a remarkable book, and yeah, that's a definite.
I did want to ask you if, just because of the slight similarity of the name, the Mikola sisters, and your dropped reference to Tanizaki in the early chapters, was the Makioka sisters, Tanizaki's family epic, a book of importance for you when you were writing this?
I love that you asked that question. No one has asked me that question. But it's when I came to New York, the joke was, I had this fancy fellowship where you were supposed to do research, and I had already started the book. So I was afraid of force feeding the project with too much research early on. So all of the other research colleagues, they were actual professors and historians, and they just ordered a bunch of books and got to working. And my bookshelf in my office was suspiciously empty. But the one book that I had on my shelf was the Makioka sisters. So
really? Oh.
Yes. So that's well spotted. And yeah, of course, towards the end, I actually used my office and I did a lot of research towards the end, but I just didn't want to start with the research. So
that's a book that was profoundly important to me as a young person in college, and so it was. I could feel it a bit in the work, and I was very happy to find it there. So I'm so glad.
To hear that.
And I really want to recommend The Sisters. I am not overselling it. I am underselling it in many ways. It's just a book to be transported with. You will not soon forget the Mikola sisters nor Jonas, both the Jonas in fiction and nonfiction form. And I hope we'll run out to their independent bookstores and purchase a copy. It's just that I really love, and I'm so pleased that I got a chance to speak with you about it, Jonas.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's all from me for now. My thanks to Jonas Hassen Khemiri for coming on to talk about his brilliant family saga, The Sisters, out now with Farrar, Straus and Giroux. You can find links to purchase The Sisters and all of Jonas's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, and now YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.